He was already standing in the boardroom when she walked in, and the way his eyes flicked over her face told her he didn't recognize her. That stung more than she expected. 28 years old, dressed in a navy suit that didn't give away the storm in her chest, Claire knew she had one chance to hold steady. He had broken her mother's life apart and walked away without ever looking back, and now here he was, older, grayer, but still sharp in his movements, still controlling the room like it belonged to him. No one else in the room knew what tied them together. To them she was the bright young analyst from New York, here to present fresh numbers, sharp ideas, maybe a little too bold. To him, she was just another junior face. But to herself, she was Melissa's daughter. She carried the memory of nights her mother cried alone in a kitchen that smelled of burnt coffee, waiting for calls that never came. Claire kept her hands folded, careful not to let them tremble. She had rehearsed this moment so many times, how she would enter, how she would stand, how she would hide the fury beneath her calm. She thought she was ready. But seeing him there in person, standing tall, adjusting his tie like nothing in his life had ever gone wrong, she felt heat rise up her neck. The meeting started. Richard spoke first, his voice calm and deep, a tone that had persuaded investors for decades. He had the kind of voice that made people lean forward, nod along, believe without questioning. Claire hated how steady it sounded, how natural. She forced herself to write notes, just to keep her hands busy, while every nerve in her body screamed to throw the papers in his face and shout who she was. But no, that would come later. Timing was everything. When it was her turn, she rose slowly, holding her binder close. Every eye in the room turned to her, but her focus stayed locked on him. She began speaking. Clear, professional, careful. Slides clicked behind her, numbers danced across the screen. She was there to talk strategy, but beneath every line she delivered was a silent war. Do you see me yet? Do you remember my mother? He didn't. Or maybe he refused to. His pen tapped against the table, his gaze shifting from her charts to the faces around the room, never staying on her too long. He asked one pointed question about her figures, not harsh but sharp enough to test her. She met it head-on, steady voice, facts lined up like soldiers. A small nod from him signaled approval. And that was the worst part. Approval, as if he hadn't destroyed the life of the woman who raised her. The others saw sparks of rivalry, maybe even respect. They didn't hear the pounding in her chest or know that she was holding back words that could tear the room apart. When the meeting ended, she stayed behind, pretending to gather her notes slowly. He walked past her, close enough that she caught the faint smell of his cologne. It hadn't changed. It was the same scent her mother used to describe late at night, a smell that clung to her memories like smoke. Her stomach tightened. "Good work," he said simply, barely slowing down. 2 words. That was all she got from him that day. But for her, it was enough to confirm what she already knew. He didn't see her. Not yet. Later, alone in her hotel room, she sank onto the bed, shoes kicked off, binder tossed aside. The city buzzed outside her window, neon signs glowing in the Texas night. She pressed her hands to her face and let herself feel the weight of it. Anger, sadness, the echo of her mother's voice. She had walked into his world, and he had brushed past her like she was invisible. But she wasn't invisible. Not anymore. She whispered the words aloud, a promise more than a thought. "You're going to know who I am." And with that, Claire opened her laptop, pulling up files she had guarded for months. Emails, documents, fragments of evidence. She wasn't ready to use them yet, but she wanted to feel them close, like weapons waiting in the dark. The fight had only just begun. Claire woke before dawn, the city still quiet, the streets below her window glowing with scattered lights. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, letting the ache in her chest settle into something sharper. Yesterday had been the opening move, but today had to carry more weight. If Richard hadn't recognized her, then she would make him notice in ways he couldn't ignore. She showered, dressed, pulled her hair into a neat twist. The mirror showed a woman who looked calm, professional, untouched by storms. But under that polished surface was the same fire that had driven her since she was a teenager. Melissa's words echoed, "Don't let him win twice." Her mother had said it once, years ago, after a night of broken tears. At the time, Claire hadn't understood what it meant. Now she did. By 8 she was in the office, early enough that the halls were nearly empty. She walked past framed photos of Richard shaking hands with governors, cutting ribbons, standing beside smiling employees. To the world he was a leader, a builder, a man whose story inspired. Claire paused at one photo where he was holding a shovel at a groundbreaking ceremony, laughing as if life had never cut him. She wanted to smash the glass, but instead she turned and walked on. When the team gathered again, Richard entered with the same confidence as the day before. He didn't rush, didn't need to. Conversations hushed as soon as he reached the table. His presence filled the space without effort. Claire hated that power, hated how even she could feel it pulling at her, even though she knew the truth. The morning passed with presentations, discussions, charts, and graphs. Claire contributed in short, precise bursts, never too much, never too little. She wanted to appear sharp but not threatening, careful but not timid. Richard glanced her way more often today. She caught it. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe suspicion, but it was enough to stir a small flicker of satisfaction in her chest. At lunch, she walked outside with a colleague, a woman named Dana who had been friendly since day one. Dana talked about her kids, her commute, the chaos of balancing work and life. Claire nodded, laughed at the right times, but her mind kept drifting back to Richard. Every move he made, every word he spoke, felt like another piece of a puzzle she had to solve before she could strike. That afternoon, Richard asked her to stay behind after a session. Her pulse jumped, but she kept her face neutral. The others filed out, leaving her alone with him in the wide, glass-walled room. "You handled yourself well yesterday," he said, leaning back in his chair. His eyes studied her now, more focused than before. Not many new analysts push back with that much confidence. "Thank you," she replied, her tone measured. "What's your background?" he asked. Simple words, but her stomach tightened. Did he sense something? Or was it just casual interest? "Finance degree, New York," she answered. "Started with a mid-sized firm before moving into strategy. I like challenges." He nodded slowly. "Challenges are good. They keep us sharp." For a moment, silence hung between them. She thought about her mother, about the nights of silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. She wondered if he even remembered Melissa, or if she was just another woman erased from his history. "I expect big things from you here," he said finally. Then, almost as an afterthought, "Reminds me of someone I used to know. Same drive." Her throat closed. He didn't say the name. He didn't even look like he meant it. But the words scraped against her heart. She managed a polite smile, gathered her papers, and walked out before her hands betrayed her by shaking. That evening, she sat by her hotel window again, watching the lights flicker across the skyline. The city was alive, buzzing with strangers chasing their own dreams and failures. She thought of her mother back home, working late shifts, still carrying the weight of a betrayal that had never been made right. Claire whispered to the glass as if Melissa could hear her. "I won't let him bury you. Not again." Her phone buzzed with a new email from Dana, notes from the day, small updates, nothing urgent. Claire replied quickly, then turned back to her laptop. She opened another folder, one she hadn't touched in weeks. It held scanned letters, old photographs, and a single recording. Melissa's voice, shaky but firm, telling her story into a tape recorder years ago. Claire played it quietly, just enough to hear the quiver in her mother's tone. "He promised me forever," Melissa's voice said. But forever ended when he walked out the door. The sound filled the room, wrapping around Claire like smoke. Her chest tightened. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about giving her mother's pain a voice, making sure it wasn't forgotten. By the time she shut her laptop, the plan was clearer. She would get close enough for Richard to see her not just as an analyst, but as a presence he couldn't escape. He would feel her shadow in every decision, every meeting. And when the time came, when the truth came out, he would have nowhere left to hide. Melissa had always told Claire the truth in pieces, never in one long story. It was as if her mother feared that saying it all at once would crush her daughter under the weight. A comment while folding laundry. A sigh at the dinner table. A memory spilling out after too much coffee late at night. Claire grew up with fragments, puzzle pieces of a love that had burned bright and then turned into ash. One night, when Claire was 16, she came home to find Melissa sitting at the kitchen table with a shoebox open in front of her. Inside were faded photographs, letters, ticket stubs. Things that smelled faintly of another life. Claire sat down across from her, and Melissa pushed one of the photos forward. A younger version of Richard stared out from it, smiling wide, his arm around a woman who wasn't Melissa. "That's him," Melissa said quietly. "That's the man who promised me everything." Claire studied the photo. Richard looked happy, carefree. It didn't match the man she imagined, the man who left her mother crying at night. She looked at Melissa, at the way her hands twisted the edge of the photograph. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because you're old enough to understand," Melissa said. Her eyes were tired, but steady. "And because I don't want you to ever let someone like him decide your worth." That night was the first time Melissa told her about the betrayal. How Richard had come into her life when she was young, full of charm, making her laugh when no one else could. How he had held her hand at her brother's funeral, how he had whispered promises of forever under the Texas sky. And how, when the time came to stand by her, he had walked away, choosing his reputation, his ambition, over her. Claire remembered sitting there in silence, anger curling in her stomach. She wanted to track him down even then, shout at him for what he had done. But she also saw the way Melissa's voice cracked, the way she smoothed the old photographs as if they were glass. Claire reached across the table and held her mother's hand, and in that moment a silent vow formed. One day, she would make him see what he had done. Years later, that vow carried her into Houston, into his world. The next morning, Claire carried those memories like armor as she walked into the office. She had slept little, replaying her mother's voice, the sound of that shaky tape recording still fresh in her ears. Richard was already there, speaking with two executives, his laughter bouncing across the room. She felt her jaw tighten but forced a calm expression as she slid into her seat. The meeting began with numbers, forecasts, projections. Claire listened, contributed when asked, but her mind drifted back and forth between the room and the past. The contrast gnawed at her, the polished man in front of her and the broken woman who had raised her. One built empires, the other worked double shifts just to pay bills. At one point Richard made a joke, and the room laughed. Claire smiled faintly, hiding the bitterness in her chest. To everyone else, he was a mentor, a giant in the industry. To her, he was a ghost walking in daylight. After the session, Dana nudged her. "He likes you," she whispered with a grin. "That's rare for him." Claire forced a laugh. "Maybe he just likes my numbers." But inside, her stomach churned. Liking her wasn't part of the plan. Recognition was. Truth was. Yet even the suggestion of his approval scraped against the wounds she carried. Later that day, during a coffee break, Claire stood near the window when Richard approached. She braced herself, every muscle tense. "You've got a sharp mind," he said, sipping his drink. "Reminds me of my early days." Claire looked at him, searching for any flicker of recognition, any shadow of memory that might connect him to Melissa. There was nothing. Just a man talking about himself, proud of his past. "Thank you," she said evenly. "Ambition is good," he continued, eyes narrowing slightly. "But ambition without loyalty can be dangerous. Remember that." The words hit her harder than he could have known. Loyalty. He dared to speak of loyalty as if he hadn't abandoned her mother when she needed him most. Claire clenched her jaw, holding back the retort burning in her throat. Instead, she nodded, letting him walk away, his stride confident, untouchable. That night, back in her room, she pulled out the shoebox she had brought with her, the one filled with copies of her mother's keepsakes. She laid them out across the bed, photos, letters, the faint scent of old paper filling the air. She stared at Richard's young face in those pictures, then at the notes he had written to Melissa, words of love, promises of forever. She whispered aloud, almost to herself, "Loyalty, huh?" The bitterness in her tone echoed through the empty room. She picked up one letter, the ink faded but still legible. "You're my world, Melissa. Nothing could ever change that." Claire folded it back carefully, her fingers trembling. Her mother had believed those words, built her life around them, only to have it all collapse. And now here he was, decades later, still speaking of loyalty as if he owned the meaning. Claire leaned back, her eyes burning but dry. She couldn't cry, not now. The time for tears had passed years ago. What remained was resolve. The next day, she decided, she would shift her strategy. If he didn't recognize her face, then she would make herself unforgettable through her work, through her presence. She would become the one person in the room he couldn't dismiss. And slowly, carefully, she would weave in threads of truth until the picture became undeniable. She closed the box, slid it under the bed, and turned off the light. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was filled with flashes of her mother's smile, the sound of her laughter before the hurt, and the echo of Richard's voice, calm and steady, speaking about loyalty like it belonged to him. Claire knew the storm was only beginning. He walked into her world like he belonged there, not as a savior, not as some untouchable man from glass towers and endless wealth, but as someone who recognized something she didn't even know she carried. That day, the knock on the door startled her mother so much she nearly dropped the chipped mug she was holding. Claire hurried to get it, never expecting that the man standing in their hallway would be Richard Hayes himself. He looked strangely out of place, the collar of his coat stiff against the draft, his shoes polished to a sheen that didn't belong on their side of town. Yet, when his eyes swept over the second-hand furniture, the patchwork rug, the faint smell of laundry detergent that never quite covered the old paint, there was no flicker of disgust. If anything, it was recognition. Claire froze, her hand still gripping the edge of the door. She wanted to slam it shut, but her mother, Melissa, touched her shoulder softly. "Let him in, baby." Melissa's voice held the kind of calm that made Claire uneasy, the tone she used when she had already decided something important. He stepped in carefully, not dominating the small space but moving like someone trying not to disturb what was already fragile. The living room looked smaller with him in it, but somehow, instead of shrinking them, it expanded Claire's awareness. Every little detail stood out, the quiet hum of the old fridge, the peeling wallpaper by the corner, the sound of her mother's slippers shuffling. "Thank you for letting me come," he said, his tone softer than she remembered from their meetings, stripped of its boardroom weight. Melissa smiled faintly, weak from her treatments, but her eyes were alive in a way Claire hadn't seen in months. He sat at the small kitchen table, the one Claire had picked up from a neighbor's yard sale, and folded his hands as if this modest setting deserved the same attention as any of his billion-dollar offices. For the first few minutes, the conversation drifted easily. He asked about Melissa's health, and Melissa, always too proud to complain, spoke with dignity. Claire watched suspiciously, wondering what angle he was working. Men like him didn't just show up. But then something unexpected happened. He laughed, not the polished laugh of a man playing a role, but a laugh that carried weight from somewhere real. It happened when Melissa teased him about being the kind of man who probably never ate canned soup. He admitted that he had grown up on worse, in a neighborhood where soup came from church drives and secondhand meant survival. Claire blinked, unsure if she believed him, but when he described the apartment he grew up in, with roaches in the corners and paint that smelled of mold, she saw something flicker in his eyes. It wasn't performance. It was memory. She hated the way it shook her defenses. When Melissa excused herself to rest, leaving them alone in the small living room, Claire felt the walls press in. He sat across from her, his coat draped over the back of the chair, and for the first time, he didn't look like a man unreachable. He looked like a man waiting. "You think I'm here because I want something from you," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "Don't you?" She shot back. His gaze didn't flinch. It studied her, searching, the intensity making her skin warm even as she tried to look away. "Not everything is a transaction, Claire." She almost laughed, but the way his tone wrapped around her name unsettled her. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, and for a moment, the distance between them felt charged, fragile, dangerous in a way she didn't want to name. Their fingers brushed when she reached for the water glass on the table. It was nothing, a second's touch, but it lingered in her nerves like a spark that refused to fade. She pulled back quickly, standing, needing space, air, something. He didn't push. He simply sat back, eyes following her like he was seeing more than she wanted him to. When he finally stood to leave, Melissa's soft voice came from the bedroom. "He sees you, baby. Not just what you can give him." Those words followed Claire into her restless dreams that night. She hated how much they echoed. She hated how they planted questions she didn't want to water. And yet, the image of him sitting at their small table, looking like he belonged, stayed with her longer than she cared to admit. The next morning started with the sound of rain against the thin glass of her window, steady and unrelenting. Claire sat at the table with her laptop open, trying to lose herself in work, but her thoughts betrayed her. Every few minutes, they wandered back to the night before, to the way Richard's gaze had lingered, to the strange steadiness of his presence in her small world. She told herself it was nothing, that men like him didn't carry tenderness without an agenda. Still, her fingers hovered over the keyboard longer than usual, her mind refusing to let go. Melissa shuffled in wearing her worn robe, her hair tied back loosely, her skin pale but her smile still bright. "You didn't sleep," she said, as if it wasn't a question. "I'm fine," Claire muttered, not looking up. Her mother eased into the chair opposite her and reached for her tea. For a while, the only sound was the rain. Then Melissa sighed. "He's different, you know. I watched him. The way he looked at you, like you reminded him of something he lost." Claire snapped her head up. "Mom, please. Don't start this." But Melissa just sipped her tea with that maddening calm, as though she'd spoken a truth Claire wasn't ready to admit. The day dragged on. Emails blurred together, phone calls felt heavier than usual, and by the afternoon, Claire decided to escape into the rain. She pulled on her jacket and headed for the little cafe at the corner, a place she had gone to since college. It was cozy, dimly lit, The kind of place where nobody cared who you were. She had just settled with her coffee when the door chimed and he walked in. For a split second, Claire thought she had conjured him. His coat was damp, droplets clinging to his hair, but his eyes found her like it was the only reason he had come. He walked over slowly, not assuming, not rushing, just steady. "Do you mind?" he asked, nodding to the empty chair across from her. She wanted to say yes, to protect the fragile distance she had built overnight, but the word that came out was softer. "No." He sat, the silence between them thick but not uncomfortable. She watched him wrap his hands around the cup the barista brought, the steam rising between them. For a man who had the world at his fingertips, he looked strangely at ease in this ordinary corner of town. "You make it hard to stay away," he admitted finally, his voice low. Claire's breath caught, the confession slicing through her defenses. She shook her head, forcing a small laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "You don't even know me." "Maybe not everything," he said, leaning forward slightly. "But I know enough to see what matters." Her pulse betrayed her, quickening, betraying the anger she tried to cling to. She wanted to tell him to stop, to leave her alone, but instead she asked, "And what is it you think you see?" He studied her, not with arrogance but with unsettling patience. "Strength you don't give yourself credit for. A fire you keep trying to smother because the world keeps telling you to stay small." Her throat tightened. She hated the way his words struck deep, hated that he seemed to see cracks she didn't want anyone touching. She looked away, out the rain-streaked window, willing herself not to unravel. The cafe suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. She pushed back her chair. "I should go." He didn't stop her, didn't plead or demand. He simply nodded, his voice even. "I'll be here tomorrow." The audacity of it made her freeze, her hand on the strap of her bag. "You think I'll come back?" "I think you'll do what feels right," he said quietly, then turned his attention to his cup as if she hadn't just become the center of his gravity. She walked out into the rain, her heart pounding, her chest tight with something that wasn't anger anymore, though she wished it was. That night, lying in bed, the storm still whispering against the windows, Claire closed her eyes and saw him again, not in the polished boardrooms where he commanded the world, but in that cafe, his hands wrapped around a cheap ceramic cup like it was the only warmth he needed. And though she told herself she hated him, that she didn't trust him, that she couldn't afford to fall for whatever game he was playing, sleep betrayed her. Because she dreamed of him. The morning after the storm carried a strange quiet. The streets glistened under the pale light, and Claire sat at her window staring out at the soaked world, her thoughts knotted. She told herself she wouldn't go back to the cafe. She wouldn't give Richard the satisfaction. But her resolve was shaky, weakened by the memory of his words, the way his voice had slipped under her skin like it belonged there. Melissa noticed. "You're restless," she said gently, brushing crumbs from the counter. Claire bit back a sharp reply. Her mother always noticed too much. "I just need air." Air led her back to the cafe despite her own promises. She pushed open the door, and there he was, like he had been waiting. Not a trace of surprise in his eyes, only that quiet certainty that irritated and drew her all at once. "You came," he said simply. She rolled her eyes, sliding into the seat across from him. "Don't make it sound like fate. I just wanted coffee." But she knew better, and so did he. For a long stretch, they talked about everything but themselves. Music, books, the way people forgot how to look at each other in a world obsessed with screens. His laughter was softer this time, less guarded, and she found herself watching him with a curiosity she hadn't expected. He wasn't charming her in the way men usually did, no rehearsed lines, no cheap tactics. He was disarming her by being present. Then, without warning, his expression shifted, serious and raw. "Do you ever feel like your life isn't really yours?" he asked. The question cut too close. Claire's chest tightened. "Every day." He leaned in, his gaze steady. "That's why I'm here." She froze. "What does that mean?" Before he could answer, a figure appeared by their table. A woman, tall, striking, with sharp eyes that flicked from Richard to Claire. Her lips curled into a smile that wasn't kind. "Richard," she said smoothly, "I should have known you'd find entertainment in places like this." Claire stiffened, every instinct screaming to flee. She didn't need an introduction to understand. This was someone who belonged to his world, someone polished and ruthless. Richard stood, his jaw tight. "Not now, Victoria." But Victoria's gaze lingered on Claire, cold and assessing. "She's not what I expected." Interesting choice. Heat burned Claire's cheeks, humiliation mingling with anger. She stood quickly, grabbing her bag. "I don't need this." She pushed past them, out into the street, the rain beginning again in thin drops. Her heart hammered as she walked faster, furious at herself for letting him pull her into something she didn't understand. Later that night, the knock came at her door. She hesitated before opening it, but she knew. Richard stood there, his hair damp, his eyes searching hers. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "She had no right." Claire cut him off. "Who is she?" His silence was answer enough, and it stung. "You should go," she whispered, fighting the ache in her throat. But he didn't move. He stepped closer, his hand hovering near hers like he was afraid to touch her. "It's complicated, Claire. But I need you to trust me." Her laugh came out broken. "Trust you? You can't even tell me the truth." And yet, when his hand finally brushed against hers, she didn't pull away. The storm outside grew heavier, thunder rolling through the night, echoing the chaos inside her chest. That was when Melissa's voice called from the hallway, sharp and alarmed. "Claire, who is it?" Claire froze, caught between the two worlds pressing in on her, the man at her door and the mother who had given up everything to protect her. Richard's eyes pleaded, "Please, let me explain." But the sound of Melissa's approaching footsteps made the choice impossible. And before Claire could decide, the door behind her swung open. Melissa's eyes landed on Richard, and the softness she usually carried vanished in an instant. Her expression hardened, her voice steady but cold. "You need to leave." Richard didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his gaze still locked on Claire. "I didn't come here to cause trouble." Melissa stepped closer, putting herself between them. "That's exactly what you are, trouble. My daughter doesn't need men like you." The words cut Claire even though they weren't aimed at her. She wanted to defend herself, to push back against the protective shield her mother always threw up, but she couldn't find her voice. Richard spoke before she could. "With all respect, this isn't your choice to make." Melissa's eyes narrowed. "It is when she's under my roof. Get out." Silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, Richard nodded, his jaw tight, his voice controlled. "I'll go. But this isn't over." His eyes flicked to Claire one last time, lingering, pleading without words. Then he stepped back into the storm, the door closing behind him with a dull finality. Melissa exhaled sharply, her shoulders dropping. She turned to Claire, her face lined with worry. "He's dangerous." Claire's voice cracked. "You don't know him." Her mother shook her head. "I know enough. Men like him, they take what they want and leave destruction behind." The words stung, not because they were harsh but because Claire feared they might be true. She retreated to her room, shutting the door, pressing her forehead against the cool wood. Her chest ached with confusion, anger, longing. She hated the pull he had on her, hated how much space he took up in her thoughts. That night, sleep was impossible. Every sound of the storm outside felt like an echo of her heart, every memory of his eyes burned into her. By morning, exhaustion weighed on her, but the ache in her chest hadn't faded. She tried to bury herself in work, but her phone buzzed. A message. "I'll wait for you. Same place." Her pulse jumped. She stared at the screen, torn between deleting it and clutching it like a lifeline. Against every warning, against her mother's voice still echoing in her head, she found herself walking to the cafe by afternoon. Richard was there, of course. He stood when she walked in, but she didn't let him speak first. "You can't just show up in my life and expect me to bend," she said, her voice sharper than she felt. He nodded, absorbing the blow. "I don't want you to bend. I just want a chance." She shook her head, frustration bubbling. "A chance for what? To play whatever game you're playing with that woman? With me?" His jaw tightened. "Victoria means nothing. She belongs to a world I've been trying to leave behind." "And you think I'm supposed to believe that?" "I think," he said carefully, "you already know the difference when I look at you." The words pierced her defenses, but she refused to let him see. She grabbed her cup, her hands trembling slightly. "You're not making this easy." "Love isn't supposed to be easy," he said softly. The word hung between them, too soon, too heavy. Claire's breath caught, her eyes stinging. She wanted to walk away, to slam the door on him and the chaos he brought, but her body betrayed her, rooted to the spot. "Finally," she whispered, "if I give you this chance, you have to tell me everything. No more secrets." He hesitated, the weight of something unsaid pressing against his silence. But then he nodded. "Tomorrow, meet me, and I'll tell you everything." The promise both terrified and thrilled her. That night, she told herself she wouldn't go. She promised herself she wouldn't. But when morning came, she found her steps carrying her to the cafe again, her heart pounding with dread and anticipation. He was waiting. Always waiting. And just as he opened his mouth to speak, just as she braced herself for truths she wasn't sure she wanted, the cafe door swung open. Victoria walked in. This time, she wasn't alone. Victoria didn't just walk in, she owned the room. The click of her heels against the floor carried the same confidence that had rattled Claire the first time. But now she wasn't alone. A tall man in a dark suit followed close behind, his eyes scanning the cafe with the sharpness of someone used to control. Claire felt her stomach twist. This wasn't chance. This was deliberate. Richard stood slowly, his face tightening. "Victoria." Her smile curved like a blade. "Did you really think you could hide here?" The man beside her spoke then, his voice low and dangerous. "You've been making moves without us. That ends today." Claire's heart pounded. She looked between them, then back at Richard. "What is this? Who are they?" He didn't answer fast enough. The silence felt louder than the storm still drizzling outside. Claire pushed back her chair, her pulse racing. "You said you'd tell me everything. Now's the time." Richard's jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the two intruders. "Finally," he said, "not here." But Victoria laughed, sharp and cruel. "Why not? She deserves to know the man she's sitting with isn't who she thinks he is." Claire froze, every nerve on edge. "Say it," she demanded, her voice trembling. Richard turned to her, his eyes heavy with the weight of something he had carried too long. "I've been lying to you," he admitted, his voice breaking the fragile trust that had barely begun. "My name, my past, the people I walked away from. They don't let go easily." Her chest constricted, anger and fear colliding. "So what am I to you? A distraction? A game?" "No," he said sharply, almost desperate. "You're the first thing that's felt real in years." The man in the suit stepped forward, his tone cold. "Enough. You're coming with us." Claire watched as Richard squared his shoulders, his entire body shifting into something she hadn't seen before. Controlled, dangerous, prepared. He glanced at her once, his eyes burning with urgency. "Stay back." But she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The cafe that had once been her escape now felt like a stage for a battle she didn't understand. The barista had slipped quietly into the back, the other customers hurried out, leaving only the storm outside and the storm inside. Victoria's eyes sparkled with malice. "Tell me, Richard, how long do you think you can keep her safe?" Claire's blood ran cold. She realized then, it wasn't just about him. She had been pulled into something much bigger, and walking away was no longer an option. Richard shifted, placing himself between her and them. His voice was steady, but Claire could hear the strain. "If you touch her, this doesn't end clean. You know that." The man smirked. "We'll see." And just like that, the tension snapped. Richard moved first, fast and precise, his hand slamming the man's arm aside as the table tipped. Victoria shouted, the crash of cups and chairs filling the cafe. Claire stumbled back, her breath ragged, her hands shaking as chaos erupted in front of her. She wanted to scream, to run, but her feet refused. All she could do was watch as Richard fought like a man who had done this before. Too smooth, too controlled to be anything but trained. The man staggered back, glaring, but not defeated. Victoria caught his arm, pulling him toward the door. "This isn't over." Her eyes cut to Claire, sharp and warning. "You should have stayed out of it." Then they were gone, swallowed by the rain. Silence dropped heavy. Richard stood in the wreckage, his chest rising and falling, his hands clenched. Slowly, he turned to Claire. Her voice shook. "Who are you really?" His shoulders sagged, as if the fight had stripped away the last of his defenses. He walked toward her, close enough for her to see the storm still raging in his eyes. "I told you I'd explain," he said softly. "But once I do, there's no going back. You won't look at me the same." Claire swallowed hard, her entire body trembling. "Then start talking." He looked at her for a long time, his lips parting like the truth burned on his tongue. And just as he began to speak, the cafe door burst open again. But it wasn't Victoria. It was Melissa. Melissa's eyes swept across the wreckage of the cafe, then froze on Richard. The overturned chairs, the shattered cups, the tension still humming in the air told her everything she needed to know. Her voice cut like glass. "What have you done?" Claire rose too quickly, her hands trembling. "Mom, it's not what it looks like." Melissa's gaze snapped to her daughter, hard and unyielding. "You're shaking, Claire. Look at yourself. You think that's love? You think this is safe?" Richard stepped forward, but Melissa's arm shot out as if to shield Claire. "Stay away from her." He stopped, his chest rising and falling, his voice calm but urgent. "You don't understand. They came for me. They'll come again. And now they'll come for her." Melissa's face paled, but her resolve didn't waver. "Then you should have left her out of it." Claire's heart thudded painfully. "Stop it. Both of you. Her voice cracked with desperation. I need answers, not more fighting. Richard looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his eyes shifted, like he was weighing the cost of breaking open his world. My real name isn't Richard, he said finally, his tone low and steady. It's Daniel. Daniel Ross. I worked for them. Victoria, the man you saw. It was power, money, control. I thought I could walk away, but people like them don't let go. They've been following me. Watching. And now you. Claire's blood ran cold. She sank into the nearest chair, her mind spinning. So everything was a lie. Daniel, Richard, shook his head sharply. No. What I feel for you isn't a lie. It's the only truth I have left. Melissa stepped between them again, her voice shaking now, though she tried to steady it. Do you hear yourself? You're telling my daughter you dragged her into danger because of your feelings? That's not love. That's selfish. Claire pressed her palms to her temples, her chest tightening. I don't know what to believe anymore. Silence hung heavy until Melissa reached for Claire's hand. You're coming home with me. Tonight. We're done here. But Claire didn't move. Her hand shook in her mother's grip, torn between the safety Melissa offered and the fire Richard sparked inside her. Richard's voice broke the silence. If you leave now, they'll find you when I'm not there. You think you can outrun them, but you can't. The only way you're safe is if you stay with me. Melissa's eyes burned with fury. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. The tension cracked wide open. Claire pulled her hand free, her chest heaving. Stop deciding for me. Both of you. I'm not a child. She stood, her voice trembling but firm. I'll decide who I trust. And right now, I need space. From both of you. She walked out into the rain before either of them could stop her, the cold drops soaking her hair, her clothes, her skin. She didn't care. She just needed air. She needed to think. But the street wasn't empty. A black car idled at the corner, its engine humming low. The tinted window slid down just enough for her to see a flash of eyes. Victoria's. Claire froze, her breath catching in her throat. Then the window rolled up, the car pulling away slowly, deliberately, as if to remind her she was being watched. Her knees weakened. She stumbled back toward the cafe, but before she reached the door, she heard it, Richard's voice shouting her name, footsteps pounding the wet pavement. She spun, her chest tight, torn between running into his arms and running as far from him as possible. And in that split second of hesitation, the car made a sharp turn and came back. The door swung open. Someone stepped out. The car door opened, and the figure that stepped out wasn't Victoria. It was the man from the cafe, the one in the dark suit with the cutting eyes. The rain slid down his face like it didn't touch him at all. He looked at Claire the way a predator looks at prey that has nowhere left to run. Get in the car, he said evenly, his voice almost calm. Too calm. Claire's pulse raced, her feet refusing to move. She felt Richard closing in behind her, his hand reaching for hers. She's not going anywhere with you, Richard said, his voice hard as steel. The man tilted his head, his mouth twitching in the faintest smirk. You think you can stop us? After all the years you worked for us, after everything you know. Claire's breath caught. Years. Worked. The words rattled around her head, sharp as glass. She turned to Richard, her voice breaking. He's telling the truth, isn't he? You were one of them. Richard's jaw clenched, his silence an answer she didn't want. The man stepped closer, ignoring Richard entirely now, his eyes locked on Claire. He can't protect you. Not from us. You're already marked. Every step you take, every breath, it belongs to us now. The words hit her like a blow. Claire stumbled back, her shoulder brushing Richard's chest. His arm wrapped around her instinctively, pulling her close, shielding her. "You'll have to go through me first," Richard said, his voice low, dangerous. The man's smirk widened. That was always the plan. Then everything happened too fast. The man lunged, and Richard shoved Claire aside, the impact sending her crashing against the cafe's brick wall. Pain shot through her arm, but she barely registered it. Her eyes locked on the violent struggle unfolding just feet away. Richard fought with brutal precision, every move sharp and efficient, but the man matched him blow for blow. The sound of fists against flesh, the splash of water beneath their feet, the grunts of exertion, it was chaos, raw and terrifying. Claire's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to run, but something rooted her to the spot. Her mind screamed at her to move, but her body refused. Then, just as Richard gained the upper hand, slamming the man against the hood of the car, a second door opened. Victoria stepped out, her umbrella shielding her from the rain, her smile cool and unshaken. She didn't rush, didn't interfere. She simply watched, her presence more chilling than the fight itself. Claire's heart hammered. "Why are you doing this?" she cried, her voice breaking. Victoria's eyes flicked to her, sharp and dismissive. "Because he betrayed us. And now, so have you." Richard's fist connected with the man's jaw, sending him sprawling to the ground. But before he could press the advantage, Victoria snapped her fingers. Two more men emerged from the car. Richard's expression tightened. For the first time, Claire saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before: doubt. He reached for her hand, gripping it hard. "Run." Claire shook her head, frozen. "I can't leave you." "Run," he shouted, shoving her toward the alley. Her feet finally obeyed. She stumbled into the narrow street, her breath ragged, her chest burning as the rain soaked her through. She heard footsteps behind her, Richard fighting, men shouting, the chaos swallowing him whole. She ran until her lungs screamed, until the sounds faded into the storm. But when she finally stopped, gasping for breath, she realized she wasn't alone. A figure stepped out of the shadows of the alley. Not Victoria. Not Richard. Melissa. Her mother's face was pale, her robe clinging to her in the rain, her eyes wide with fear and fury. She grabbed Claire's arms, her grip desperate. "You're coming with me. Now." Claire's chest heaved. "Mom, you don't understand." Melissa shook her head violently. "No, you don't understand. He's not who you think he is. I know because I've seen men like him before." Claire blinked through the rain, her mind spinning. "What are you talking about?" Melissa's eyes filled with something Claire had never seen in her before, terror rooted in memory. "Because your father was one of them." The words crashed into Claire like lightning, leaving her stunned, breathless, broken open in a way she didn't know was possible. And before she could respond, a shadow fell across them both. Someone else had followed. The shadow stretched long across the wet alley, swallowing the faint light above. Claire tightened her grip on her mother's arm, her pulse hammering so hard it felt like her ribs would crack. The figure stepped closer, and the dim light revealed his face. It wasn't Richard. It wasn't Victoria. It was the man from earlier, the one Richard had fought, the one who should have been lying broken on the ground. Yet here he was, his jaw bruised, his shirt torn, but his eyes burning with the same cruel fire. "You can't outrun this," he said, his voice low, steady. Rain slid down his cheek as if it were oil, leaving him untouched. "Every path leads back to us." Melissa shoved Claire behind her, surprising Claire with the force in her small frame. "You're not taking her," she said, her voice sharp as glass. The man tilted his head, amusement flickering across his face. "And you think you can stop me? You don't even know the half of it." Melissa's chin lifted, but Claire could see her hands trembling. "I know enough. I know what you are. I know what you did to him." Claire's breath caught. "To who?" she whispered, but her mother didn't answer. The man's smile widened, though there was no warmth in it. "So you've been keeping secrets too. No wonder she's so confused." His eyes flicked to Claire, piercing straight through her. "Your father wasn't who she told you he was. Not some ghost who left you. He belonged to us. And she helped hide him when he tried to leave." Melissa's whole body stiffened. Claire felt her world tilt, her stomach twist into knots. "That's not true," Melissa snapped, her voice cracking. "You don't know what you're talking about." But Claire heard the tremor in her mother's words, saw the way her eyes darted, not at the man but at her. "Mom." Claire's throat tightened. "Is it true? Was Dad part of this?" Melissa's lips parted, but before she could answer, the man moved. He lunged, his hand grabbing Melissa by the wrist, yanking her forward. She cried out, the sound ripping through the storm. Claire's heart jolted, and without thinking, she grabbed a loose metal pipe from the ground and swung with everything she had. The pipe connected with his shoulder, the force vibrating up her arms. He staggered, more shocked than hurt, and let go of Melissa. "Run!" Melissa screamed, her voice raw. But Claire didn't move. She couldn't leave her. The man straightened, his smirk gone, his eyes darker, sharper. "You've got fight," he said to Claire, his voice almost admiring. "But it won't save you." Melissa pulled Claire's arm, dragging her backward, but the alley ended in a brick wall. No way out. The rain pounded harder, echoing the drum of panic in Claire's chest. The man stepped forward, slow, deliberate, his presence filling the narrow space. "You can't fight destiny. Your father thought he could too. Look where that got him." Claire's legs weakened. She wanted to ask what happened to her father, but fear glued her mouth shut. Then, a sudden crash echoed from the mouth of the alley. Richard. He was bleeding, his shirt torn, one eye swelling shut, but he was still standing. His eyes locked on the man, his voice hoarse but firm. "You don't touch her." The man laughed softly, like Richard's defiance was a tired joke. "You never learn, do you?" Richard moved fast, tackling him before another word could be spoken. The impact shook the ground, the two of them rolling through the mud and rain, fists colliding in a blur. Melissa shoved Claire toward the wall, shielding her with her body. "Don't look," she whispered, but Claire couldn't tear her eyes away. Richard was fighting like a man with nothing left to lose, but the other man fought like he had nothing left to prove. Every strike seemed to land harder, deeper. Claire's chest burned, her throat tight. She wanted to scream, to help, to do something. Anything. Melissa grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to face her. Her eyes were wild, her words frantic. "Listen to me, Claire. You can't trust him. Richard isn't saving you, he's saving himself. He's always been one of them." Claire shook her head violently, tears mixing with the rain. "No. He's protecting me. I saw him. You don't know what he's done." Melissa's voice cracked, desperation spilling out. "I should have told you sooner, but I was trying to keep you safe. They all want the same thing, and if you go with him, you'll never be free." Her words dug into Claire like claws, shredding what little certainty she had left. Richard or her mother? Which voice was truth, and which was poison? The fight crashed against the wall, the man's hand around Richard's throat, Richard straining to break free. His eyes met Claire's for a split second, pleading, begging, demanding. "Run!" he choked out. Melissa gripped Claire's hand, pulling her in the opposite direction. "With me. Now." 2 voices. 2 pulls. 2 lives. The rain pounded harder, the storm closing in, and Claire knew, whoever she chose now would change everything. She opened her mouth, her choice trembling on her lips. And headlights flared at the end of the alley, blinding and sudden. A black car screeched to a halt, the door already swinging open. Victoria's voice sliced through the storm. "Enough." The car door slammed, and Victoria stepped out like the storm had been waiting for her. Rain slid off her coat, her heels clicking against the wet ground as if the chaos around her bowed down to her presence. Claire froze, her body trembling, her mind splitting in two. Richard was on the ground, locked in combat, her mother gripping her hand with desperation, and now Victoria, calm, collected, eyes sharp enough to cut glass, stood in the middle of it all. "Let her go," Victoria said, her voice steady, almost bored, but underneath it was steel. The man holding Richard sneered. "She's already ours. You're too late." Victoria's lips curved, not into a smile but into something colder. "You should know by now. I'm never late." She moved faster than Claire thought possible. One moment she was standing still, the next she drove her heel into the man's ribs, sending him staggering back. Richard coughed, gasping for breath, rolling away from the wall. Claire's mother yanked her hand, dragging her toward the shadows, but Claire resisted, her feet digging into the mud. She couldn't look away from Victoria, from the strange mix of danger and protection radiating off her. Victoria's eyes flicked toward Claire for a brief second, sharp and deliberate, like a signal. "You have to decide," she said. Melissa shook her head wildly. "Don't listen to her. She's worse than him. She'll eat you alive, Claire." Richard coughed, dragging himself up, his face pale but his voice raw. "She's lying. Victoria doesn't care about you, but I do. I always have." The words pierced through the storm, cutting Claire open. Her mother's hand was still on her wrist, Richard's eyes still locked on hers, and Victoria's presence hung in the air like a final test. 3 paths. 3 truths. 3 traps. Claire's chest heaved, her throat burning with the weight of every lie, every half-truth, every secret kept from her since she was a child. "Stop!" she screamed, the sound tearing through the rain. "Just stop." The alley froze. Even the storm seemed to pause. Her voice shook, but she pushed the words out anyway. "I'm done letting you all pull me around like I'm a puppet. If you want me, then you'll have to face me. Not each other. Me." For the first time, none of them moved. They just stared at her, as if the girl they thought they controlled had slipped through their hands. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. Richard's jaw clenched. Victoria's gaze narrowed, like she was measuring Claire anew. The silence shattered when the man lunged again, this time not at Richard, not at Victoria, at Claire. Her scream caught in her throat, but before his hands reached her, a gunshot split the night. The man collapsed, his body heavy in the mud, blood mixing with the rain. Claire's knees buckled. Her ears rang. Victoria lowered the gun, her arm steady. "Decision made," she said flatly. "You don't belong to them. You never did." But the words didn't feel like comfort. They felt like chains. Melissa collapsed beside Claire, sobbing, clutching her face in her hands. Richard staggered closer, his voice rough. "You're not safe with her. Don't you see? She'll use you just like the rest of them. I'm the only one who can get you out." Victoria didn't even look at him. She stepped closer to Claire, her tone calm, as if she were speaking only to her. You can walk away now. I'll protect you. I'll end this war before it swallows you whole. But you have to leave them behind. Both of them. Claire's breath came fast, her chest aching. Her mother. Richard. Victoria. Every choice was a trap. Every promise poisoned. She thought of the nights she lay awake, wondering why her father had left. She thought of the fights, the tears, the lies that had shaped her life. And she realized, none of them had ever given her the truth. They only gave her what kept her bound to them. Her voice cracked, but it carried through the storm. I don't want any of you. Not if it means I lose myself. Victoria's eyes narrowed, calculating. Richard froze, his mouth open. Melissa sobbed harder, shaking her head. But for the first time, Claire felt something like control. Not freedom, not yet, but the first step toward it. She pulled her arm free from her mother, stepped back from Richard, and faced Victoria head-on. If you want me to stay, you'll have to prove it's not just another lie. Otherwise, I'll find my own way. The storm raged around them, the air thick with tension. Victoria didn't move, didn't blink. Then, slowly, she holstered the gun. You've got more of him in you than I thought, she said softly. Richard's head jerked, his voice breaking. What do you mean? More of who? Victoria's eyes cut to him, then back to Claire. Her father. The man you all buried in secrets. The ground shifted beneath Claire, the truth dangling just out of reach, and she knew this was only the beginning. The headlights flickered, the storm thundered, and the last words she heard before the night swallowed them whole were Victoria's, sharp and final. Claire, it's time you learn who you really are.